One day, while recording, Pink Floyd were visited in the studio by a strange bald man with shaved eyebrows. His behavior was bizarre, but when Roger Waters realized who the man was, he burst into tears. It was former band member Syd Barrett, who'd left the band 7 years before. But his sudden appearance and strange behavior wasn't even the worst part of the unsolicited studio visit. One of the most influential bands of all time, Pink Floyd revolutionized rock music with their progressive and psychedelic style. However, it wasn't all happiness and success, but all started in 1965 with its 4 original members. While at university, bassist and singer Roger Waters, keyboardist Richard Wright, and drummer Nick Mason studied architecture together. Just because guitarist and lead vocalist Syd Barrett was 2 years younger than the rest and wasn't at the same school doesn't mean he was a complete stranger. He and Waters were childhood friends, sharing a love of music from an early age. They would eventually turn that passion into a band, but it wasn't Pink Floyd. When Syd Barrett finally joined, the band was performing under the name The T-Set. The change to the name we all know came from a bizarre coincidence. While performing one of their gigs in 1965, the T-Set learned that another band with the same name would also be playing. Thinking on his feet, Barrett changed their name to the Pink Floyd Sound. He'd been a fan of blues music and derived the name from 2 blues musicians whose records he owned, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. While performing at London's legendary Marquis Club, the band got the attention of an intrigued entrepreneur named Peter Jenner. Impressed by their sound and despite having almost no experience with the music industry, Jenner and his business partner, Andrew King, signed on to manage the group. While Jenner liked the band and its unique style, he did have one suggestion: to drop the word sound from their name. Previously, Pink Floyd had been playing mostly R&B classics, but soon their music began to evolve, and it quickly went down a strange path. They started focusing on Barrett's bizarre and psychedelic songs, often inspired by his love of science fiction. The band thrived in the underground scene, and in 1967 they took a huge step toward the mainstream. They signed with EMI and recorded their first 2 singles within the year. It looked like the band might finally make it big, but just as they were getting started, one of their most important members was on the decline. As 1967 wore on, everyone in the band started to notice that something was seriously wrong with Syd Barrett. For exclusive perks like early access to new videos, priority replies to your comments, and to have your say on future content, consider becoming a Factor8 member. On top of that, your support helps keep the channel going. Click the link in the description for more details. The effects of his substance use and mental health decline were coming to the surface, and it was impacting his work in the group right when they needed him most. Amid this struggle, they were able to pass an important milestone. They released their first album in August 1967. The Piper at the Gates of Dawn was a success, reaching number 6 and staying on the UK charts for 14 weeks. But the band were still facing internal turmoil. Syd Barrett's condition had gotten so severe that he'd become a shell of his former self. When not unconscious, he was on stage and barely performing, doing little more than standing in a daze. That year, the band agreed to play at various events, including the National Jazz and Blues Festival. But because of Barrett's condition, they had no choice but to cancel their performances. Despite these setbacks, they embarked on their first U.S. tour, which included appearances on several television shows. But if they thought Barrett would somehow recover and be able to handle the tour schedule, they were wrong. As the American tour continued, Barrett's bandmates and the public watched him worsen. His behavior was disoriented and distant, and when speaking on TV, he was barely coherent. It eventually got so bad that Pink Floyd's management decided to cut the tour short and bring them home. Something needed to change. Faced with a difficult situation and few options, the band brought in guitarist David Gilmour. As they passed into 1968, they announced him as the band's new member. They planned to have him take over on guitar and leave Barrett to only serve as songwriter. Even with Gilmour picking up the slack, soon Barrett's contributions to the band were near zero. While he was their friend, they had grown to see him as a burden. The band met with their management to discuss their options, and later that year, they asked Syd Barrett to leave Pink Floyd. Barrett had long been praised for his beautifully experimental lyrics, but now that he was gone, someone else had to take his place. Roger Waters became the chief lyricist, and they transitioned away from the songs written by Barrett. Now that they were getting their second wind, they made a triumphant return to the U.S. in July 1968 for what became their first major tour. As they became this new version of themselves, a new release marked the transformation. Pink Floyd released Metal in 1971. Fans and critics raved about David Gilmour's additions, and the album has been regarded as the official departure point from the Barrett-led era of the band. Unknown to them, they were on the cusp of their greatest success yet. With Roger Waters now the band's primary lyricist, Pink Floyd released the first of their most successful albums, The Dark Side of the Moon, in 1973. It was an immediate hit in the UK, reaching number 2 and spending nearly 7 years on the charts. Globally, the album has sold over 45 million copies. The band experienced a new height of fame and fortune, and it left the band members exhausted in every sense of the word. With such a big success, they needed to come up with a stellar follow-up. They began work on their new album, Wish You Were Here, in 1975. Even for uber-talented musicians, creating something new can be challenging. Yet despite a slew of creative disagreements, personal problems like Nick Mason's divorce, and the band's overall fatigue, Wish You Were Here was another huge hit. Now that they had made it, bigger and more complicated issues began impacting the group. Issues like money, specifically the division of royalties. This dispute spilled into the public eye when Pink Floyd released Animals in 1977. It stood out as their first album without a writing credit for Richard Wright. Wright would later remark on Roger Waters' ego and how he believed he was the reason for their success. Pink Floyd had become a global phenomenon, so naturally the band started to sell out stadiums, but the sheer size of these concerts made the members feel anxious and uncomfortable. Roger Waters grew withdrawn and irritable, acting rudely to fans who annoyed him, including an infamous incident at the final performance of the In the Flesh tour when he spat in a fan's face. Once the tour finished, David Gilmour thought the band had reached its apex with nothing else to strive for. By mid-1978, Waters had a few ideas for Pink Floyd's next project. With some hesitancy from the other members, the band decided to move forward with the album, using the working title of Bricks in the Wall. Waters wanted to tell a story throughout the album and tasked co-producer Bob Ezrin with writing a 40-page script detailing the narrative. Inspired by the stories of both Waters and Syd Barrett, it told of a rock star becoming disillusioned with life and the music industry, slowly descending deeper and deeper into madness. When it came to recording the album, problems arose once again, culminating in Richard Wright being fired from the band for his lack of contribution. After Pink Floyd released The Wall in 1979, its success gave birth to an ambitious project, turning it into a film. Alan Parker was brought on as a director, and the end product was described as surreal, repulsive, and depressing. Although Waters had been the creative lead for a long time, Gilmour became increasingly defiant of his vision. It was clear that everyone had reached a tipping point. To separate himself from the devolving situation, Waters focused on his own career. In 1984, he released his debut solo album, The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking. Soon after, he started touring by himself. Intending to handle things diplomatically, the 3 remaining band members went to dinner to discuss their future. By the end of the conversation, they each left with different interpretations of the decision they'd reached. Waters believed they'd agreed Pink Floyd was no more, but Mason and Gilmour thought they would continue after a hiatus. Waters grew determined to cut off every connection to the band he could, and after telling EMI that he had left the band, Waters requested his release from any contractual obligations. He even went to the High Court to prevent any further usage of the Pink Floyd name, hoping to break up the band in the eyes of the law. Finally, in 1987, Waters reached an out-of-court agreement with Gilmour, which allowed Pink Floyd to continue as a band. By this time, Gilmour and Mason had started work on a new Pink Floyd album and decided to bring Richard Wright back. But even with his addition, recording the album once again proved problematic. Without Roger Waters as the band's creative lead, the recording was arduous. Beyond struggling with their artistic direction, Mason and Wright were out of practice. Pink Floyd released a momentary lapse of reason in 1987, and fans naturally wanted to know Roger Waters' opinion. He called the album a poor imitation, specifically noting Gilmour's lyrics, which he called third-rate. With the relationship between Waters and Gilmour seemingly beyond repair, it looked like they'd never share a stage again, until one day in 2005. Waters, Gilmour, Wright, and Mason reunited for the benefit concert Live 8. Organized by Bob Geldof, star of The Wall, the former bandmates performed together one more time. Despite the animosity of the past, Pink Floyd's performance went off without a hitch and included some truly memorable moments. For some music fans, this was one of the greatest moments in rock history. A year later, in July 2006, Syd Barrett died at just 60 years old. Following this, both the band and the media at large praised Barrett for his pioneering contributions to Pink Floyd. In 2008, they'd lose another member. After a battle with cancer, Richard Wright died at the age of 65. Afterward, many spoke about Wright's work in the band, noting it as overlooked and unknowingly integral to their success. Following the respective losses of Syd Barrett and Richard Wright, the remaining band members honored both men. Nearly a year after Barrett's death, all four members performed at his tribute concert, although Waters performed separately. Pink Floyd's journey was a roller coaster. To many, Wish You Were Here was the band's peak, but it brought with it a painful melancholy. David Gilmour's opening guitar phrase unintentionally reminded Roger Waters of Syd Barrett. Then, by chance, while the band were recording the album, a certain someone decided to pop by. In 1975, a disheveled man walked into the studio while Pink Floyd were recording Shine On You, Crazy Diamond, a song they had written about Syd Barrett. The man seemed nonchalant, and the band members at first thought he was an EMI employee. When Roger Waters realized that this man with a shaved head and shaved eyebrows was actually Syd Barrett, he burst into tears. Barrett later left the studio without saying goodbye, and it was one of the last times that any of the band members ever saw him. If you enjoyed this Factinate video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories. If you want to see in who we cover next, join our membership program through the link in the description for exclusive perks. Your support means everything to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.